Hi there. I just recently published an article about boundaries and how we can, in a certain way, create more intimacy by having better boundaries. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things in that piece and some of the things that I didn't put in that piece. So the whole idea was sparked by noticing that there's people who are having lots of debates about frustration with other people's boundaries, or people overusing or misusing boundaries, or somehow creating some sort of division or separation. And noticing that people actually have opinions about other people's boundaries, I find to be interesting, because it seems like we should be able to have a right to our own boundaries. And that might be true. There's a certain way where there's some things that are sovereign to me that no one else gets to have access to. So that is true. We do have a right to say where people are not allowed in our thoughts, our body, our mind, our dreams, our visions. Some things are sacred just to us. But then there's other things that we also are thinking about as boundaries that are being used as boundaries that actually are somewhat different. So the way I think about it is thinking about boundaries as having three layers. And it's important to talk about all of them. So we have that first one, that limit boundary. Nothing's allowed inside of here. And I don't let this into my house, into my home, whatever that looks like. The next layer of boundaries are our needs. Now, these are the things that I have learned that I need in my life. I need a certain amount of sleep. I need a certain amount of silence. I need exercise. I need whatever that looks like. And no, those needs are important, and I get to have, in a certain way, big part of my life, or most of the things I do are trying to get my needs met. And the trick about needs is that I'm responsible for my own needs, but there's no one else is actually responsible for making sure that I get my needs met. And this is the part that's really interesting, because we need to actually communicate that. Say, hey, this is something that I need in a relationship or in a workplace, or, in my society, in my culture, in my neighborhood. But if I feel like I need that, then I need to tell other people that that's something that I need. And then it's up to them to say, cool, I'm okay with that. Or no, I'm not going to do that. And this is the part that gets really tricky, right? It's like trying to figure out. It's like, well, if I need it and you're not going to give it to me, well, then I might have to find someone else. And maybe that's something that maybe that relationship isn't going to work. And then the third layer of boundaries is desires. Now, I think as I've grown as an adult and as a human, I've gotten better at learning, like, these are the things that I really want to have in my life. This would be the stuff that would make it most optimal and really great. Now, speaking about those is also a certain kind of talking about boundaries, because as I reach out with my desires, I'm going to start running up against other people's edges. And then it's up to those people to say whether or not they want to give me the things I desire or not. And it's up to me to decide if I want to continue to be in a relationship where my most optimal desires aren't getting met. So recognizing this difference between the no limit and then the needs and then the desires. And there's amazing things that can happen by conversing across that whole spectrum. Because as we talk across that whole spectrum, we notice that there's a way that sorry about that. There's a way that we're really having a full conversation. We really get to know one another. And then it also can help us clarify what are the things that we don't really get to demand of other people. Because what happens often is that people will have their needs, and then they're wanting someone else to give them their needs. And that person has a boundary that says, I'm not going to do it. The reason why this is really important is because when we don't have clarity about our boundaries, there's something that happens that can create a dangerous situation. It's not really fair for either person. If I let someone penetrate my own boundaries, not only am I creating a situation that is, or allowing a situation that's going to be painful for me and maybe might cause resentment or frustration, but it also has allowed someone to cross into a boundary where maybe they didn't want to do that. that if we had been clear about what we wanted or didn't want at the top, that we could have not allowed ourselves to create a situation. People don't want necessarily to cross other people's boundaries. So that's why it's really important for us to communicate about that. And then we can think about the boundaries as being the meeting point, right? And between me and you, we get to delineate these little edges and figure out, well, where are you and what's that? And find into the nuance, or what does it mean about this? I want to say a little trick, though, about needs, because it's super, super common to confuse needs with the strategies to get those needs met. So while I might need a certain amount of sleep, the various strategies that I have to get that may or may not be relevant, and so when we're asking for something and we say, I really need this, or I really want this, figuring out why it is that we really need that or why we really want that can open up a whole set of possibilities, because there might be other creative ways of getting needs met that are different than whatever strategy that we've gotten accustomed to. Cool. So that's mainly what I wrote about in the article, and there's a couple other pieces, though, that I wanted to point out that I think are a little interesting. There are situations where we have chosen to engage in a special kind of relationship. Now, it can be with a partner or something, or it can be a group, or we're going to make a group, or we're going to form an organization, or a whole country, let's say. In that formation, we are basically deciding that, okay, we're going to try to get something to work together. And in those kinds of places, we get to create a certain shared set of boundaries. And boundaries don't always have to be symmetrical, but in these kinds of situations, there's a way that we get to co-create with the other person what our boundaries are. And I think it's interesting to think about, like, what would it look like to say, hey, let's try this. Let's try to make this little rule in our relationship. And then once we have that rule, then check in and be like, how'd that rule go? Or I felt really constrained, or I didn't really work for me. And just remembering that in various places that we're creating relationships or creating some kind of connection, that we get to be pretty arbitrary about the rules that we make. We can say, like, okay, no one ever wears red when we come together, or, I really don't like that scent, or I don't really like this, or, there's a way that we get to be really creative, and we can mix and match the limits, the needs, and the desires. And especially if we're thinking about the desires, we can really come up with a whole system to think about how to optimize that kind of thing. Anyways, these kinds of conversations can be really fun and really interesting. It does not necessarily have to be just a hard list of no's. And I think that's the last point that I wanted to make, that I didn't quite make in this other written piece. And that's that this can be done in very casual, simple ways. And in my life, one of the ways that I'm like constantly thinking about this is, continuing to ask someone, like, hey, do you mind if I do this? Or how do you feel about that? Or do you want to have this conversation? And then in the conversation, ask again, is this still working for you? Do you still like this? Oftentimes, in my experience, not everyone's really good at making boundaries. Either we're really awkward about it, or we're afraid to ask for it, or we're afraid of the impact on the other person. And so that invitation of just asking someone, are you enjoying this? Do you like this? Are we having a good time? That's the kind of stuff that can be really powerful, because I think that it really speaks to, one of the most important pieces of this whole topic is, if I want to be connected with you, if I want to be in relationship, and it's really important for me to learn both about how you work, but also because if I know how you work, then I can also then really show up and make your life really optimal. I think one of the things that we might miss in this conversation a lot is just the fact that most people want the best for each other and for one another. And so when we're thinking about boundaries just as like the limits, then we're missing out on the opportunity to really have a conversation about what we want and how we can grow together and how can I give you what you want, because that would be really enjoyable for me. So thank you for listening to this. Check out the essay, and if you haven't already subscribed to my Substack, I encourage you to do that because there's lots of really cool stuff. And coming soon or in progress right now, unfolding, is what I'm calling the Omni-Win project. And I'm trying to figure out how to show our culture that we have lots of ways for us to win, for all of us to win. And I hope that we can create a culture where that's something that we actually want to do. So thank you for listening to this. Check me out at omni-win.com. My name is Duncan Autrey, and have a good day.